The fullest calendar I ever saw belonged to a man who felt that nothing was happening to him. Every hour was spoken for. Every day was a wall of appointments, and he was quietly disappearing inside all of it. I have watched this pattern for decades. People fill every hour and still feel that life is passing them by. They use the word busy the way other people use the word alive, as proof they are still useful, still needed, still here. They reach for it the moment someone asks how they are. Busy is not the same as living. I have watched people confuse the two until the difference was the only thing left standing. One of them you can measure on a clock. The other you can only feel in your chest at the end of the day. Here is what I want to give you today, plainly. The research is now clear about which kind of full day protects your mind and which kind quietly drains it. And the line between the two is not where most people assume. It is not about how hard you work or how many hours you fill. Picture two people who retired the same year, both busy from morning to night, both exhausted by bedtime. One stays sharp and steady for 20 years, the other fades, and the reason has almost nothing to do with effort. Let me show you where the difference actually lives. Let us start with where the pressure to stay busy even comes from, because most people never question it. They simply feel it like a hand at their back. In 1986, a gerontologist named David Eckert wrote something in the journal The Gerontologist that I have never forgotten. He called it the busy ethic. His point was simple and a little uncomfortable. When people stop working, they do not drop the work ethic they carried their whole lives. They repurpose it. The old command to be productive becomes a new command to look continuously occupied, to be busier than ever, even in retirement. I have heard it in 100 living rooms. People listing their week to me like a defense, and that is exactly what it is. Eckert saw that being busier than ever is often armor. It is a way of answering a fear no one says out loud, the fear of being seen as obsolete, finished, set aside. The busyness is not always joy. Sometimes it is just a shield held up against being judged useless. There is a newer layer to this, and it matters. In 2022, two researchers, DePaula Couto and Rothermund, described what they called the activation norm. Society now tells older people they must stay endlessly fit, sharp, and productive, that to age well is to never slow down. For people who have the health and means to keep up, this lifts their spirits. They feel capable, and they are. But for those facing the natural slowing that comes to all of us, that same pressure turns cruel. The very same message that energizes one person produces guilt, stress, and a low, grinding mood in another. They cannot meet the demand to look eternally young, and they punish themselves for it. I have seen that quiet self-blame up close, and there is nothing noble in it. So let me reframe the whole thing gently, because no one caught in this deserves shame. The goal was never to look busy. The goal was to feel that the day mattered. Those are different targets, and we keep aiming at the wrong one. Most decline begins earlier than people think, and so does the pretending. Now I have to tell you about a finding that overturns one of our most comforting beliefs. The idea that after a hard-working life, the kindest thing you can do for your mind is to let it rest. In 2010, two economists, Susan Rowetter and Robert Willis, published a study they called Mental Retirement. They did something clever. Different countries let people retire at different ages, and that gave them a kind of natural experiment across 13 nations. They could compare minds that had stepped away from demanding work against minds that had not. What they found was sobering. Earlier retirement was linked to a drop of roughly 4.5 points in memory scores for people in their early 60s. not a small dip. A real one. The reason they gave is plain enough to hold in your hand. They called it the unengaged lifestyle. When nothing in your day demands much of your mind, the mind coasts. It is not a moral failing. It is not laziness. It is simply what a muscle does when nothing asks anything of it. The body remembers what you repeat, and so does the brain, including the habit of not being asked. But here is the part that catches people. The harm does not show up right away. In 2017, a researcher named Gabriel Heller-Salgren studied the trajectory of mental health after retirement and found what he called the retirement blues. At first, there is no harm at all. There is a holiday effect, relief, lightness, the joy of an open calendar. People feel wonderful and they tell everyone so. Then, somewhere around 4 years in, a significant dip arrives. The routine has dissolved. The work friendships have quietly thinned. The sense of being needed has drained away while no one was watching, and the contentment that felt so real at the start turns out to have been hiding the erosion underneath it. That is the trap, and I want you to see it clearly. The early happiness can be a false positive. It feels like proof that everything is fine, when it may only be the calm before a slow slide. Regret does not arrive all at once. It gathers. None of this is about disease or destiny. It is about how a day is built, which is a thing you can change. That is the whole point. If the idea that an idle mind is not a rested one surprised you, the habits that genuinely keep a brain working are worth knowing. I walked through every one of mine in my video on how I know my brain won't fail me. So if resting the mind backfires, the obvious answer would seem to be, do more, stay busier. But that is wrong too, and this is where it gets interesting, because it was never about how much. It was about how varied. In 2020, a researcher named Sumi Lee published work in the Journals of Gerontology that changed how I think about a day. She studied something she called activity diversity, and she measured it 2 ways. The first she called richness, how many different kinds of things you do. The second she called evenness, how balanced your time is across them, rather than dumped into one. And what she found is that this diversity protects the aging mind, independent of how many raw hours you spend on any single thing. Sit with the strangeness of that. 5 different light activities spread evenly through your day can protect your mind better than one demanding, all-consuming project. The brain does not want one heavy meal. It wants a varied diet. This quietly dismantles the most popular retirement advice there is. You have heard it. Find your one big passion project. Pour yourself into the novel, the workshop, the cause. And there is nothing wrong with passion. But if that single pursuit crowds out everything else, you may be feeding your mind a narrower diet than the man down the street who does 5 small different things every day. Here is how I translate Lee's finding into something you can actually do. A good day has a walk in it, a conversation with a real person, something made with your hands, something read, something tended, a plant, a meal, a small repair. That shape matters more than how full the hours are. The texture is the medicine. Now go back to those 2 retirees I described. Same calendar, same hours filled, but one of them lives a varied, even day, a little of this, a little of that. The mind kept curious from many directions. The other repeats the same narrow groove from morning to night, however busy it looks from the outside. Same volume, completely different texture. And years later, you can see the difference written on their faces. The variety was never decoration. It was protection. Let me make this even more concrete, because there is a finding here so specific, it changed my own evenings. In 2022, David Reichlin and his colleagues published a study in the journal PNAS drawing on more than 145,000 adults over 60. They asked a question almost no one thinks to ask. Not how long do you sit, but what are you doing while you sit? They separated passive sitting, watching television, from active sitting, like reading or using a computer. And the difference was stark. Time spent watching television was linked to a 24 to 31% higher risk of dementia, but time spent using a computer was linked to a 15 to 20% lower risk. Both are sitting. Both keep you in the chair. One quietly harms, the other quietly helps. The chair was never the villain. What you do in it is the whole story. And now the part that should change, how you plan your week. This held regardless of how much people exercised. You cannot simply walk it off. You cannot earn back 2 hours of passive television with a morning jog. The exercise is good, keep it, but it does not erase what the mind did or failed to do while seated. There is structure behind this, not just statistics. In 2021, Ryan Dougherty and his colleagues followed people for 20 years in a study called Cardia, with brain scans at the end. Those who watched more television over those decades had measurably less gray matter in the regions tied to memory and attention. The tissue itself was thinner. The mind does keep the score. I want to be careful here because I am not here to shame anyone's evening. I watch programs I love. There is nothing wrong with rest. The point is simply this. The mind asks to be a participant, not only a spectator. When you read, you build. When you only watch, you mostly receive. You have heard people say sitting is the new smoking. I find that too blunt to be useful. It frightens people without helping them. The truth is gentler and more precise. It is not the sitting. It is what you do while seated. The body remembers what you repeat. Since we are talking about what those sitting hours cost you, there is one kind of movement that quietly decides whether you stay independent at all. I gave it its own evening in my video on the habit that decides if you stay independent. Now I have to turn from the body and the chair to something harder to see. The mind that looks perfectly occupied and is, in truth, the most exhausted thing in the room. There is a habit researchers call repetitive negative thinking, rumination about the past, worry about the future. The mind running the same painful loop over and over, going nowhere. In 2020, a researcher named Natalie Marchant published work in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia, linking this kind of thinking to a steeper decline in memory and thinking over just 4 years. Marchant gave it a name I find unforgettable: cognitive debt. The idea is this: a mind that loops on threat, keeps the body's stress system switched on, quietly, constantly, in the background. It never gets the all clear. And it is that sustained low strain day after day that does the slow harm. Not one bad afternoon. The years of the system never being allowed to rest. This is the part that unsettles people, so let me say it plainly. You can look completely occupied while your mind is the most tired thing in the house. You can fill every hour and spend most of them rehearsing an old hurt or bracing for a fear. That is busyness too. And it is not living either. It is the treadmill running inside your own head. Let me validate something before I redirect it. Those feelings are real. The grief, the worry, the old regret, they are human and they deserve respect, not scolding. I am not telling you to feel nothing. I am telling you that the looping is the part to interrupt, gently. By turning your attention outward toward a person, a task, a thing made with your hands, not by force, but by giving the mind somewhere better to go. I will not pretend this is a cure for anything. I do not build advice on more than the evidence holds. This is simply what helps me manage my own quieter, darker hours. I give the loop a door to walk out of, and I have watched that small move steady people far more anxious than I am. Now let me give you some relief, because not every modern worry is the thief you have been told it is. You have heard that the news will ruin you, that watching it floods your body with stress. But in 2018, two researchers, Deal and Bogdan, actually measured this in older adults, even with highly charged cable news, and they found essentially no measurable stress response. The bodies of older people stayed remarkably steady. Many of us, it turns out, have already earned a kind of emotional ballast that the young have not. We have seen enough cycles to know the world usually keeps turning. Here is another one that surprised even me. You have heard that social media is poison. For the young, the comparison damage is real and well documented. But several studies of older adults find the opposite pattern. That for us, more online connection is associated with less loneliness, not more. We tend to use it to reach the people we love, not to measure ourselves against strangers' highlight reels. The harm clusters in the young. For older people, that thin line of connection can be a lifeline. So let me correct something calmly. Not every modern worry is a real thief. And if you spend your energy chasing the wrong villain, banning the news, fleeing your grandchildren's photographs, you waste the very time you are trying to protect. You stand guard at the wrong door. The real thieves are quieter. Passive absorption. The looping mind. It was never the television or the telephone itself. It was always how we used it, whether we showed up as a participant or slumped in as a spectator. I will admit, I once lectured a friend for an hour about her phone, then realized I had spent that same hour worrying about her phone. We both laughed. The villain, it turned out, was the worry. So if busyness is not the answer, and the wrong villains are not the thieves, what is left? A kind of math that frees you, if you let it. There is a psychologist named Laura Carstensen whose work I return to often. She developed something called socio-emotional selectivity theory. The idea is beautiful and true. When people sense that time is finite, not in despair, but in clear-eyed awareness, their priorities shift on their own, away from accumulating, competing, and proving, toward what is emotionally meaningful. This is not resignation. It is wisdom, arriving on schedule. The writer Oliver Burkeman put numbers to it. He pointed out that a long human life is about 4,000 weeks. That is all. And the frantic attempt to do everything, to keep every option open, to stay informed on every front, that is really a refusal to accept a limit. It is the engine of the busy treadmill. We run because we cannot bear to choose. But here is the liberating reversal. Once you accept that you cannot do it all, you are finally freed to deliberately skip the trivial. Choosing is not losing. Every yes you give to what matters is a no to what never did, and that no is a gift, not a defeat. Cal Newport, who studies how we work, calls the alternative a trap, pseudo-productivity, where busyness itself becomes the proof of worth. The cure is the opposite. Do fewer things, work at a natural pace, aim at something that lasts rather than something that merely fills the hour. So here is the distinction, as clean as I can make it. Busy fills the hours. Living chooses them. One happens to you. The other you do on purpose. Your future is being practiced now. So let me bring it all together into one honest question you can ask tonight. Vary the shape of your day. Keep your mind a participant, not just a spectator. Interrupt the looping when it starts, and choose the meaningful over the merely full. That is the whole of it. Not a program, a way of looking. Here is your one step, and it is not hype. Tonight, look at tomorrow's plan. Go down it item by item and ask one thing of each. Is this busy or is this living? Then keep what is living, and let yourself release a little of the rest. You do not have to empty the calendar. You only have to start telling the difference. Remember those two retirees from the beginning. Same calendar, same full hours, completely different lives. The difference was never the volume. It was always the texture, the variety, the participation, the meaning underneath the motion. You can change the texture of a day starting tomorrow morning. That power never leaves you. Late is not the same as finished. If you are hearing this at 70 or 80 or 90, it is not too late to change the shape of a single day, and a life is only a long row of days, one after another. There is no shame in arriving at this late. Most of us do. What matters is that you arrived. I would like you to subscribe and stay with me, and to leave a comment with one thing, just one, that you will trade out of your day tomorrow. I read them. I reflect on them with you. Do this before it becomes regret. If tonight's question stayed with you, there is one more risk worth naming, the quiet loss of purpose that no full schedule can hide. I made a whole conversation about it, on the most underestimated risk after 65.